Okay, perfect. We'll go ahead and move on to this next caller. Caller,
Let's move on.
welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Good afternoon, Javaris Abernathy.
Hey, Mr. Abernathy, how are you?
Hey, good. My question is, I've heard him mention the similarities between Judaism and Islam, and that how Islam is not an idolatrous religion, but we see the Muslims taking the pilgrimage to Mecca to kiss the Kaaba, the black stone, and then walking around it. How is that not idolatry?
Okay, so just clarify to restate the question. I'm going to put it out there so I can have it for notes. But also, if I'm wrong with that, please correct me because I need to understand what's going on here. Okay, so basically it says he mentioned Ramadan and kissing of the stones as far as
No. I'll explain everything.
Okay,
So
just re-explain the question altogether. Thank you.
All right.
Truthfully, it's best for a Muslim scholar to address these questions. I'm a rabbi, but the call was made to me, and I will be glad to answer it. Okay. Let me first state at the outset: Judaism is not an eclectic religion. We're not. If you are a true monotheist, if you say that there is one God and there is no other, as the prophet Isaiah and almost every prophet scream this, there really isn't much room for Hare Krishna. So Judaism, unlike Eastern religions as an example, is just not eclectic. Islam is also a complete monotheism. They worship one God, and therefore Islam can't be eclectic. It can't be. You have Judaism and Islam, which are possibly two of the least eclectic religions in the world, Abrahamic faiths, and strangely, there is this mutual respect between Judaism and Islam. Which, the reason I point this out is it just illustrates that there's something really interesting going on here. The reason why Judaism respects Islam deeply is because Muslims truly worship one God. Read chapter 2, verse 163, and you will understand why Muslims submit themselves to one God and no false God. Does this mean that Judaism and Islam are identical? No, but there's an enormous mutual respect. Now, leave politics out the window. Just leave it out the window. That's why Jews and Muslims really got along so well for so long. Until recent years, for unfortunately a political problem, but this has nothing to do with this has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with politics, and politics poisons everything. So the question is, if in fact, I will stand up for my cousins. I have no problem doing that. If in fact that Muslims are submitting themselves before the one true God, why are they going on a Hajj, which is one of the pillars of Islam? Why are they going to Mecca, and they're going to what's called the Kaaba? That word simply means the cube, and they're going around it 7 times. Why are they doing this? After all, that Kaaba was a place of idolatry, and it was. And every Muslim in the world will say to you right now that's watching or listening to the show is going, Amen, he's absolutely correct. There were actually hundreds of gods that were worshipped in Mecca during the Jahiliyyah, which means at a time when the Arab world was in a state of, the word really means stupidity or lack of knowledge. Okay? The key point of the Kaaba is that following the advent of Islam, meaning of Muhammad's message to his constituents is, and it's really in Islamic tradition, I should correct that, following the teachings of the Quran, Muslims then took what was a place of idolatry and transformed it into a place where one God is worshipped. So therefore, every Muslim will say, of course the Kaaba was a place where hundreds of gods worshipped. This is a very well-known part of the history of the pre-Islamic period of Mecca. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that prior to the advent of Islam, Arabs in that region were burying their daughters alive. The first people to tell you that are Muslims. Jews might not want to say because we're afraid to insult them. A Muslim will go, that's true. So the key is that when Muslims go on a Hajj, which in the Islamic faith, every Muslim is required to do that if they're able to financially and physically. If they're able to, they're required once in their lifetime to go to Mecca on this Hajj. They're not going there worship a cube, worshiping the Kaaba, which means cube. They are worshiping one God, and they are shouting the name La ilaha illallah. There is no God, but I'm going to have to tell you a really funny story, and then we'll move on from this. This goes like years ago. Never forget this. I'm not a sports fan at all. Like if you ask me who won the World Series, I don't even know who was in the World Series. I don't. Sports bores me to death. But interestingly, soccer at the highest level, like the World Cup, I find it fascinating. I don't really care about who wins, but the athletes at the very, very top of football or soccer are so amazing that it just blows my mind away of how they do what they do. Anybody who just soccer is very interesting to watch, in my opinion. I'm not the spokesman for sports, but in my opinion, at the highest level, at the World Cup level, it's unbelievable what these people can do. It really is. Just stand there and you go, I don't even know how a human being could do such a thing. I get exhausted just watching it. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. This goes back years ago. I don't know how many years ago this was. So what they do in the World Cup is they take the soccer ball and they put a emblem of a country on it. Okay, so they might put on the ball, they might put a emblem of the U.S. One year they had a ball, the soccer ball, and it had the emblem of Saudi Arabia. Now the flag of Saudi Arabia with the sword literally says these words. By the way, this is the most central core creed of Islam, that there is no God but Allah. It's central, and it appears on the flag of Saudi Arabia. Okay, they put it on the soccer ball. Okay, now because they just wanted to put a Saudi. What followed was such a Muslim was so offended and going, how do you put the most sacred creed in Islam on a ball that's going to be kicked around? They actually had to change it. So the answer to the question is that the Kaaba was a place of idol worship until the advent of Islam, and the people who are Muslims worship one God and they worship no other, and that is the most central creed of Islam. In fact, if you don't accept that there is one God and no other, and that God is Allah, and every Muslim believes that Abraham was a prophet of blessed memory. Every Muslim believes that Yitzhak was a prophet of blessed memory. Every Muslim believes that Yaakov was a prophet of blessed memory. Every one of them do. There are disputes among Muslims on fine points, but there is no such thing as a Muslim who does not believe in the Quran. Okay? So therefore, yes, the Kaaba was transformed from a place of idolatry into a place of worshiping one God. And therefore, they're not worshiping idols by going to the Kaaba. They're worshiping one God. And that's what they're expressing in their pilgrimage. So that's the answer to your question. Okay, but thank you so much for joining me, and I'm very grateful to be able to answer that question on behalf of my cousins. Although they're probably better at this than I am, but thank you so much for joining me.
Now, what if Sabians already turned their faces towards Mecca? That doesn't make any difference to us, because if the house of God was known and Sabians were there before Muslims and they worshipped the one true God, and if there's nothing wrong with their worship, or if the Muslims maintain the same things about their worship which was true and correct, then this is fine, because God can reveal through a number of prophets given to people over time. Muslims have no difficulty with those teachings. Now, if he's the God of the East and the West, why turn towards Mecca? Well, it's a focal point for people, because sometimes people need this focal point. Why we can ask, for example, that Solomon build a temple according to 1 Kings chapter 8, and then he prays to God to bless those who turn towards this temple in worship. And to this day, Jews still turn towards the temple. Well, the temple is no longer there, but the remaining wall, the Wailing Wall, is still there. And they're still required traditionally to do that. By the way, Jesus was a Jew, and you have maintained that the original disciples of Jesus were Jews. So they all turned their faces to the same thing. You ask, why pilgrimage to Mecca? Well, we should ask of Jesus, why did he make pilgrimages to Jerusalem? At least 3 pilgrimages if we count the ones in the Gospel according to John. If there's something wrong with making pilgrimages to a house, then you are condemning Jesus for making pilgrimages. You're listening to the Samaritan woman who says that God can be worshipped anywhere, because the Samaritans did not go to pay homage to Jerusalem. They did not believe in that after the splitting between the north and the south. So you're saying the Samaritan woman is right and Jesus is wrong for making pilgrimages. Oh, that is so sad, Dr. Sharosh. So finally, finally, we can agree and say that God can be worshipped anywhere, and the Quran is right. Wherever you are, God is there. But there is a particular form of worship, and that requires the Muslim in the formal prayers to turn towards the house of worship.